What is the message? What is the statement
Well,
that you're attempting to make here?
don't trust leaders to always be right.
Hello and welcome to Intoxicated Masculinity, where we talk about politics, pop culture, drinking culture, and anything else that comes up. Joining me as always is Brandon.
Hello, everybody.
And also Kale. Oh, wait, Kale's gone. We have this guy. Jim, who are you?
I'm the guest, I guess.
He's the guest, he guesses.
Yeah.
So today we've got kind of a specific topic with the reboot of Dune coming out and us being various lovers of that particular series. I thought we would talk about the Dune book first, and we'll look forward. We'll talk about the David Lynch film, which I think is going to be interesting for me because I love David Lynch, and I know a lot of people who love Dune don't like that movie very much. So I think we'll have some interesting conversations going forward about that. But first, we are going to talk about what we are drinking tonight and our relationship to the book. I will go first because I am definitely the least associated with the book, the least experienced with it. So I would ask you first, what is a desert if it is not a huge beach? And what do you want on a beach but a giant margarita?
Not where I thought you were going with that, but okay.
So I am having a giant margarita. And since Arrakis, I believe, is a little on the toasty side, a little warm, warmer than you would be comfortable with on a standard Sunday afternoon, I have decided to make it with half mezcal to bring in some of the smokiness. My experience with Dune is I've read the book once. I liked it quite a bit. I maybe have a few problems with it, a few quibbles here and there, but I liked it quite a bit. I had a lot of fun with it. I think it's sort of a unique, and it's I think kind of emblematic of a lot of the science fiction that was coming out around that time. Your Asimovs, your Philip K. Dicks, that type of science fiction, and I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Though it does
Brandon, what
really
is
have its own unique characteristics.
Oh, very definitely. Brandon, what are you drinking, and what is your experience with the book?
I am just drinking a mix of gin and chinar. I've really grown to like chinar. I suppose you could come up with some sort of desert-related reason why I'm doing it, but it's just the thing I like. I have read the book 4 times. Most recently, I just finished it again last week. And it was the first time last week, it was the first time I listened to the audiobook. And that is somewhat different.
I should clarify, I listened to the audio version as well, and I know there are some purists for the book that say that the audiobook is not exactly the same as the book.
Yeah.
It's not like an abridged version, I don't think, but it is different.
From the reviews I have seen, I think the abridgment is in a lot of the descriptions of like some of the desert places.
Fair enough.
But yeah.
All right, Jim, what are you drinking, and what is your experience with Mr. Herbert's Little Desert?
All right. First of all, I have to tell you that I'm drinking my Party People Dominican Republic 2001
Nice.
cup with the big Bronco sticker on it.
I should question: are you a licensed party person, or is this an unlicensed, unsanctioned party person?
Probably unsanctioned for sure. So my big crazy COVID getaway this spring, when everything kind of settled down and my wife and I had gotten vaccinated and our friends got vaccinated, we went to the Dominican Republic to a all-inclusive that had 20% capacity and drank tropical drinks all week. And so I made myself a concoction. It's got berry juice, vodka, some grapefruit vodka, and a little bit of peach schnapps. It's kind of
Very tropical.
Right. Or the kind of thing you might make in college when you just have a bunch of random stuff in your fridge.
Well, we will set aside my personal aversion to vodka and go forward.
Yeah, it's not my favorite thing, but it's what I had on hand. So I've read Dune multiple times. Probably the last time I listened to it, and that was probably about 4 years ago. I'm glad you guys said something about the potential abridged material, because I thought when I listened to it, I was like, seems like there was more. But when I first read it, it immediately became one of my favorite science fiction books. Mike, you mentioned kind of that it was typical of the period, and I'm going to disagree with you on that. One of the things that
Banned.
right? No re-invite, right?
This is my own personal desert fiefdom.
Right. So it's actually one of the things that I really like about it is when I was reading it, I was in high school, didn't have a lot of money. A lot of the science fiction books that I read, I was buying at half-price books. And I don't know if you know this, but it's half-price books. So if you buy an old book with a cheap price on the cover, it's really cheap. So I was reading a lot of really old Heinlein, a lot of old Asimov.
This was written in 65, so.
Right. And one of the things I really like about it is because there's, this aversion to technology in the book, I feel like it kind of stands up. Whereas some of the Asimov stuff coming out at the same time, like they're talking about having really fancy microfiche, right? Like you go back and read it, you're like, okay, well, some of the stuff is still futuristic and some of it probably was not great technology in the 1970s.
You know what that kind of makes me think of is how if you were to sort of compare the original Star Wars trilogy versus the prequel trilogy, how the original trilogy was sort of reliant on practical effects versus the prequel trilogy being dependent on the CG effects. And like CG in the 90s, I'm sorry if you were born after the 90s, you don't know this, but CG sucked big time in the 90s. I remember the one of the other YouTube channels I watched did a thing on the Matrix since they're coming out with the new Matrix movie, and the fight scene in the second Matrix movie, it's just like a bunch of rubber people fighting. It looks like Battle of the Rubber People, and they're all just kind of rubbering around. And you look at the original Star Wars trilogy, and a lot of those special effects really hold up very well because they did them all practically.
Well, it's also got a unique point of view shift. Like if you read like the Game of Thrones series, the Song of Ice and Fire ones.
That's what I was going to say too. Actually, the same thing. That it is a little reminiscent of switching sort of perspective to perspective.
But each chapter is that. Each chapter you go into like Cersei's head or Tyrion's or something. In Dune, though, it can switch 3 or 4 times on the same page. You can be in Paul's head and then Reverend Mother's head and then in Jessica's head, all on the same page as they're talking. It's kind of unique.
One thing I was curious about that I noticed when I was listening, it seems like, and again, I apologize, I don't remember a lot of the characters' names. I'm not like I remember the story very well, but the characters' names I don't. The main bad guy, the what's his name?
Baron Harkonnen.
Right. Yeah. So it seems to me that in the audio version of it, he has 2 different voices. There's like the voice that he has when he's like on his own and he's like doing his little plotting with his people and all this. And that's like this sort of very deep, sinister kind of controlling
James
voice.
Earl Jones type of voice.
And then there's this voice that he has when he's out there with the rest of the courtiers and all these other people, and he's just another asshole. And I kind of think that's intentional because I think he is kind of like that. I think he believes himself to be this utter genius. And in actuality, he's kind of just like 5% smarter than the other royals.
Or do you think he's putting on a show to make them think he's not as dangerous as he really is?
That's an interesting question. I think I'm right.
I think that's what he
thinks. I actually do, because I think that the whole point of the sort of the internal thing that he has going on is, and you sort of see this from other characters who look at him as kind of like, well, he's just kind of a schlub. Like he sees himself as being this like sort of revolutionary mind who's controlling everything. And in actuality, he's really a pretty conventional thinker. I think he's a better thinker than the people around him. but it's sort of like if you were, you know,
Well, and that's a low bar too.
right? Yeah, because a lot of the other royals are not.
Beast Raban is not a
right.
smart guy.
Right.
All right. In fairness, though, if a Messiah didn't come along, his plan would have worked.
Oh yeah, definitely. But again,
He's-
that's why I say he's about 5% smarter than everybody else around him, and that's probably enough. Like 90% of the time, if you're 5% smarter than everybody, that's probably enough to take over.
he's like what they got. Well, I bring up Game of Thrones again. It's what they said about Cersei. She has a low cunning. Like she's not dumb. She's just not brilliant.
I think that's actually a pretty good comparison of him to Cersei Lannister. Because he's cunning, and he's sort of
And ruthless enough to do the thing he thinks of.
yeah, that's another thing. He's sort of willing to do, he's willing to do whatever. So he's like willing to do things that other people aren't willing to do. But just to rewind just for a second, because I sort of want to talk about the other sort of contemporaries, whether it be Isaac Asimov, I am a disciple, or Philip K. Dick, or 2001: A Space Odyssey. I can't remember the author's name.
Arthur C. Clarke.
Arthur C. Clarke, a little less Arthur C. Clarke. I guess what I sort of mean is not that they're similar. And again, Kurt Vonnegut, who is I will say is the best author who's ever lived, but that's my personal opinion. They all have, what they have in common isn't necessarily a writing style or a common theme, is sort of what they're thinking about. They're trying to think about these big things and trying to think about how people interact with each other. So like, I think you can see a lot of parallels between Foundation and Dune, for example, but that doesn't mean they're similar books.
Right.
They're both just kind of thinking along the same lines and thinking on these big sort of psychological levels and thinking about the bigger ideas and things behind things. And that's what I sort of get, between both of those authors. And that's what I liked about Dune.
And along that same lines, Jim, are you a fan of Brandon Sanderson and Robert Jordan?
I have never read Robert Jordan. I've read some of Sanderson's stuff, and his stuff felt like candy to me. Like superficially, it was interesting, but at the end, I left feeling like it wasn't a good use of my time to read his books. How about you?
Well, I like him. I admit that that's gone down a little bit. But his
You
I
like
think
with
his-
reservations.
Yeah, his Mistborn trilogy, especially, I really see as influenced by Dune.
Yeah, I did. I did not finish Mistborn, but the first book I thought was some of his better work, and I can kind of see what you're saying there.
Yeah, well, and Robert Jordan too. When in the Wheel of Time series, when Randall Thor goes out into the wastes and he meets the I can't think of their name, the people that live out in the desert. I mean, they're essentially Freemen. I think the Freemen are probably a little more dangerous, but
I wonder, to get into comic books, because I'm a nerd and read comic books, how much the space between the mega cities in Judge Dredd is based on Dune.
Interesting. Could be.
But anyway, so to sort of start off with, let's kind of set the stage. Brandon, do you want to talk about sort of, or Jim, either one of you guys want to sort of talk about the stage? Where how do we enter the book?
Jim, go ahead. You're the guest.
So it's been a while, but if I remember correctly, they're on the Atreides home planet, Caladan. And the main thing that happens in Caladan, they're preparing for the trip to
Caladan's kind of like your planet of plenty, lots of water, lots of just kind of a nice place, just like everything's nice.
right, and it's clearly diametrically opposed to Arrakis. There's tons of water everywhere, often raining, etc. So the Atreides are getting ready to transfer their entire house to Arrakis from Caladan. They're leaving Caladan, they're leaving it all behind, and they're going to go take over the governance of Arrakis.
One question there that I was a little confused by: who is the family that was leaving Arrakis?
Harkonnens.
Harkonnens.
So is the Duke supposed to have sort of engineered that, or did he not
No.
want that?
No, that was the Emperor. Well, I mean, it was the Emperor and the Harkonnens in secret.
So I think they make it. There's no real mystery in the book. They don't kind of leave you wondering if it's a trick or not. Pretty early on in the book, they establish that most of the Atreides think that it's a trap, but they think they're smarter than the Harkonnens. So they think that because they know it's a trap, they can avoid the trap.
Spoiler alert.
Right.
Well, it's not just that they think they're smarter; they also think they're stronger. They say later in the book that half the reason that the Emperor decided to side secretly with the Harkonnens was because the fighting force that Leo Atreides had put together was coming close to the Sardaukar.
Right.
Very
And that
well
sort of
trained
gets into
fighting.
the idea of, the whole medieval governing system of having where you have a king and royals, and it's like the king has to empower the royals, but he also doesn't want the royals to get too strong because then they might, like his shiny golden hat that he wears all the time.
Right. He has to keep them fighting amongst each other. And just as an aside, the Sardaukar are kind of interesting because they're kind of like the Fremen in that they are on a very inhospitable planet, and that is part of their mystique and part of their, at least in the book, their ability to be fierce fighters is that they have to endure tremendous hardships, and that's a theme that's in some of Herbert's other works besides Dune. That in extremely harsh conditions, through evolution, lead to some extraordinary results.
Well, I mean, in history too. I mean, you have your, the barbarians, otherwise known as the Germans, and the French, who the Romans did not call them that. They called them all barbarians because they didn't speak Latin or Greek. And I mean, these are the people that the Romans sort of empowered to conquer other people. They hire this barbarian tribe to attack that barbarian tribe, and in the end, the barbarian tribes ended up coming back and taking over Rome. And whether you look at them or the Mongols or lots of other people, or even the Romans very early on. I mean, the Romans were not sort of born to be a powerful empire. It's like, sort of the arc of history is a power is very hungry and young and gets sort of fat and soft, and hungrier, smaller powers come and eat them until they get fat and soft until somebody else comes along and eats them. And it's kind of the arc of imperial history, on Earth.
So I don't remember if the next thing that happens is a cutaway to what's happening with the Emperor, but I know the next thing that happens on Caladan is one of the top Bene Gesserit, are they nuns? I don't know. I always think of them as nuns, but Bene Gesserits come.
I think they call them priests.
I don't remember.
Like the Bene Jesuits. I think they just call them Bene Jesuits.
Probably. She comes to test Paul.
The Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam.
Yep, there you go. Nice recall.
I just finished the book and I didn't remember that.
It struck me though that is a kind of Jewish sounding name, Mohiam, and then all of a sudden she's persecuting a bunch of desert people. It just made me wonder. Anyway,
interesting, because I see also in the Bene Gesserit, I saw a lot of parallels to things that go, monastic orders in the Catholic faith.
yeah.
But that's an interesting point with their name. I had not thought of that.
I kind of thought of him as well. It's funny, as an Asimov fan, the thing that I first thought of was the religious order that the Foundation creates. And if you look at the religious order the Foundation creates, that I think they dole out, and it's been a long time since I read the Foundation books, but they're doling out nuclear secrets to these other planets that are more powerful than them. But you have to be a member of the order to have the secrets. And it's sort of using religion to gain power, which is a little Catholic.
Well, and that's a Freeman thing too. I mean, at the end there, he says the person who has the power to destroy the thing controls the thing.
Right. And again, that's where, to me, and again, I'm not saying it's ripped off either way. I don't know which book was written first. I think they're just thinking of the same thing separately, but it very much sort of mirrored what Asimov was talking about in the Foundation books. You know, this idea of using a religion for your own ends, presumably good ends, but it does show how religion can be used towards ends that are not necessarily religious.
And I think one of the interesting things in the book that I thought was fascinating with the use of religion is the Bene Gesserit plan ahead for disaster. Like, they've seeded the ground on Arrakis just in case sometime in the next 100, 500,000 years, somebody needs to hide out on Arrakis. They've already tried.
Well, and you get the impression that Arrakis is definitely not the only planet they've done that with.
Yeah,
exactly. That there's basically every single planet that has been discovered, there's a Bene Gesserit person that's gone there and started this sort of myth. You know, it's just like, it's like a tiny little escape pod. You know, it's like an escape pod for a whole, thought process, basically. I thought that was really interesting.
So the Reverend Mother of the Bene Gesserit comes to Caladan to test Paul to see if maybe he is this chosen one, the Kwisatz Haderach. And at some point in the book, and I don't know if it's at this point, we learn that the Bene Gesserit have been conducting generations-long genetic experiment to try and breed the ultimate being. And Paul's not supposed to be it. He's one generation too early. And this is a kind of a central plot point for the characters around Paul. The Duke wanted a son, or Paul's mother, and I'm forgetting her name. Lady Jessica, wanted to give Duke Leto a son, and so she did, even though the Bene Gesserit told her to have a girl. And the plan was she was going to have a girl, and the Harkonnen heir was going to have a son, and they would get together, and that child would be the Kwisatz Haderach. So that is part of what is happening with the conflict between the Atreides and the Harkonnens is if everybody would just have stuck to the secret plan, there'd be a plan for the Atreides and the Harkonnens to get together with the next generation wedding, I guess. And but Jessica puts a kibosh on that and has a son, and so the Harkonnens are going after the Atreides.
So I'm curious about this. Are we supposed to think the Bene Gesserits are good, bad, or kind of not really come out of it thinking one way or the other? Because I come out of it thinking the Bene Gesserits have some good points and they're not evil. I mean, the Bene Gesserits certainly aren't like an evil, group that are trying to destroy the universe or anything, but they're very definitely authoritarian.
Well, and they're engaged in eugenics.
Well, everybody's got their down points.
So I had not really thought about this, but you've been bringing up Foundation a lot, and they kind of remind me of the Foundation because they've been around for a while. It seems like they're mainly concerned with society completely collapsing because it has before. And they think in their heads that they are doing what's absolutely necessary to ensure the continuation of the human race. And their means are kind of unseemly, but I think in their minds that they're doing what has to be done. And they're not doing it for their own power grab necessarily. I think that if you talk to one of them, they'd say that they were doing it out of altruism.
It reminds me of a Marvel comic story I read about Doctor Doom, where he has to go through this thing where he has to prove that he's pure of heart. And I think it's like you expect that, well, he's Doctor Doom, he's not going to pass that because he's Doctor Doom. And he passes through just fine because in his mind, he really wants the best for Earth. And in his mind, the best thing for Earth is for Doctor Doom to rule Earth. And that's just, once he rules the planet, then everything's going to be just hunky-dory. It's just a matter of he has to take charge.
Right. Benevolent dictatorship.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And it almost makes you wonder, what if he's right? What if Doctor Doom, what if we just passed over leadership of Earth to Doctor Doom and all of a sudden everything could be great? It's sort of the counterintuitive end to the superhero story, but it's sort of an interesting thought experiment.
Well, and there's
Fantastic Four, the villains, right? Because they're the ones that are stopping it from happening and causing all this trouble. They just get out of the way.
Well, and there's they say early on in the book that Jessica is Baron Harkonnen's daughter.
Right.
Now, Baron Harkonnen.
I thought that didn't come out till the end or towards.
No, it's right near the beginning. Baron Harkonnen is, well, queer coded at least, but he's both gay and a pedophile, which is a problem.
It's a little bit of a problem.
Other people have done videos on that, and I'll let them talk about it. But one of the things that one of the videos I watched was talking about is he hates the Bene Gesserit. I mean, everybody else, even when he has Leo in his clutches, he's not unkind to him. He's willing to torture him, but he doesn't want to do it because he doesn't want a noble family to go through that. But he hates the Bene Gesserits. And one of the things that, because at one point you find out that Reverend Mother Mohayim got the seed from Harkonnen, which the way the video is saying, it can only really mean one thing since he was at least probably gay. She mind controlled him in essentially raped him to have Jessica to keep those two bloodlines put together.
I mean, it's
which would make Harkonnen Paul's grandfather and the Reverend Mother his grandmother.
I predict that means very uncomfortable family reunions.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting because he does. I think that's very true. Harkonnen does really dislike the Bene Gesserits.
Very much.
And I don't know if that's explained explicitly in the story anywhere. But he does. I mean, hates him on like a visceral level. And I don't know if that's ever explained explicitly in the story. So I think it's kind of one of those things that may be kind of left up to the imagination. By the way, spoiler, Jim has read some of the follow-up books. I have not. Brandon, you have not read any of the sequels. Is that correct?
I have started Messiah, but I'm not far in.
Okay. So we are talking very specifically about the first book. And I think towards the end, we'll have Jim maybe just foreshadow a little bit forward. No spoilers or anything, just foreshadow just a little bit. But I mean, you know a lot about the Harkonnen. Like, why do you think he hates the Bene Gesserit so much on kind of a visceral level?
Actually, I was going to say, I don't know. I have not, I did not really pick up on that in the book. But it's been a while since I've read it. So I don't know. I think the theory of that you were positing about the Reverend Mother getting his seed might be just as good of an explanation of it as any. Because I don't remember it being adversarial towards, the guild necessarily, or any other,
or even the emperor, really. I mean, I think he wants to
Yeah.
take power eventually, but you don't get the impression that he hates the emperor.
Yeah, no, it does seem like
I don't even think you get the impression that he hates the Atreides.
I think
not particularly.
He seems like he'd be pretty content if he gets to go back to being the head of Arrakis and gets rid of the Duke. And there doesn't really seem to be an indication that he's planning on taking on the Emperor. Yeah.
By the way, for people watching, if you have theories on what you think he has against the Bene Gesserits, please leave them below, because we appear to be a little stumped by it. I mean, there's definitely theories behind it, but Brandon, you brought that up. I really got that impression too, that he does really, really dislike the Bene Gesserits
more than anybody. There's even a point where Paul is fighting Fade Ralpha near the end of the book, and they say that he has that same trigger, that one word that will slow his muscles, but that has to be imprinted. So you think, how much has the Bene Gesserit over the years been messing with the Harkonnens as well?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't have I wish I had a better response. I don't, but I think it's interesting that he does. Well, I mean, even and again, I'm gonna fail on names, but the guy who's like the sort of main little assassin for the Atreides, who they capture and then turn at the end, or towards the middle.
Thufir Hawat?
Yeah. I mean, you don't get the impression that the Baron has any sort of negative feeling towards him. He's just kind of like he means to an end, He's like, he would keep him alive for 1,000 years if it meant getting his ends, or if it didn't, he would kill him tomorrow. Right. But the Bene Gesserits he really seems to have a hate on for. Anyway, we should keep moving on. Sorry,
we still haven't gotten off Caladan, so
yeah,
right.
So they go from Caladan to I can't say fucking words.
1 second, he's still explaining about the testing.
So she tests him with what she calls the Gom Jabbar, to test his willingness to endure pain, and
which is a sign of being human,
right? To test to see if he's human.
That's a weird thing. So that one struck me right off the. It's like, he's human. Like, what do they mean by that? That
he's not an animal, that he can control himself.
So are the Bene Gesserits sort of fascists or fascisty?
I don't know.
Again, they engage in eugenics.
I just thought they were nuns. They're just mean to be mean. I don't know the answer to that. But I also don't really know how that necessarily ties into with him being the Kwisatz Haderach, or whether it's just like one thing they feel like they have to test him for. But anyway, he passes, and there's a lot of foreshadowing that things are not going to go well for the Duke. And then they leave Caladan with their entire household and head to Arrakis.
Sorry, just give me a transition noise. And they go to Arrakis, and things don't work out great. At least not right off the bat, anyway.
No, they don't.
He there's a couple of major scenes where he rescues a crew that is gathering spice, and obviously gets very mad.
Yeah, I forgot about
the
that.
loss of spice, but the loss of life of his own people.
You're talking about the Duke.
Yeah.
He's willing to give up somebody's life, or he's willing to give up some spice for somebody's life.
Yeah, including an entire carrier. He's willing to sacrifice all that just to save all the people on it, which is I don't even know
who's
if
the guy, the main guy who's flying the ship at that point, who's sort of the
The planetologist.
Right, the
Kynes.
planetologist we later find out is more important than that, but
Kynes.
Kynes, that's right, Kynes, who is
So
I think
I've always
one of the better characters in the book. I really liked his character a lot.
So I've always been a little bit confused about Kynes. So he's a Fremen and employed by the Emperor. Like,
No, I think he's not. I don't think he's again, Brandon, tell me what you think. I don't think he's originally a Fremen. I think he is
I
somebody.
think he's a
whose
Fremen the
lineage-
same way Paul is.
Gotcha.
Someone who
right,
joined.
yeah, right, yeah. In other words, he's not from Arrakis, but he is sort of what they used to very inhospitably call a gone native, and has kind of sort of Paul's predecessor in many ways.
And then there's the part at the dinner where they have this tradition that they would slop water everywhere and then clean it up with a towel and then sell the towels to the people outside the palace. And it was very noble and bougie and awful. And
Turns out capitalism is just great.
Leo puts an end to that one, making a lot of people mad. And then there's at that same dinner, there's a bunch of verbal back and forth between the planetologist, the banker, the guild liaison, Paul, Leo. It's a pretty interesting scene.
This is one thing where I kind of want to interject for just a minute, because I am a graduate of Iowa State University with a degree in political science and communication studies. Stop the applause, please. And the one thing that really struck me about this book, when I went back for my comm stat minor, it sort of does open up your eyes when you do a communications degree about how complicated communications is. And this book really struck me with how much Herbert really focused on communications, not just not just language, but how he focused on when one character is talking to another character, how they will consider not only what they want to say, but how the other character will interpret what they're saying. And so there is a whole lot of subtext going on where somebody is like, well, if I say this, they will think this. So instead I'll say this. And not in a way where they're lying or they're being dishonest, but just in a way where they understand that communication is very complicated and the way they say things really matters. And I've never read a book that I think was that sort of sensitive to how communications sort of works. And I think if there's one thing that I was most impressed with in Dune, it was how sort of careful Herbert was talking about the way in which characters communicate. In most books, especially his contemporaries, would talk about people communicating and would talk about them having conversations and people convincing people of other things. But I've never read somebody who is that sort of preoccupied with how they're communicating their ideas. And Herbert was incredibly preoccupied with that, which I was kind of very impressed with.
Well, that gets into a lot of overarching themes in the book too, because the Bene Gesserits can control people with their voice, and most of the parties in the book are very much like Game of Thrones, trying to control the entire situation and then trying to manipulate everyone into doing what they want to do. And this dinner scene is really on a small scale, the same thing. Like you're saying, people are considering what they're saying to see if they can get more information out of someone, or potentially maybe move them slightly in a direction that they want them to go. I think it also plays into Paul's later ability to predict multiple futures, and how little tiny changes can really make big differences in what happens.
Right.
Yeah, I thought it was
his.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Herbert early on was a journalist and a lecturer, so yeah, he spent a lot of time studying how people talk and what they say and what it could mean.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that I don't know. We get political on this podcast, on this YouTube. We talk about this stuff, and it is sort of interesting. There is one party who, and again, I'm not a dyed in the wool Democrat by any stretch of the imagination. But there is one party that sort of considers their rhetoric and thinks about it more, and there's one party that just sort of shoots from the hip. And I think when you read a book like this about how when you're communicating with people, it's important to consider their perspective and to consider their experiences. That sometimes, shoving a flag up their ass isn't the most, successful way to communicate with people.
Well, if you're Duke Leto, that's true. If you're Baron Harkonnen, who wants what he wants at any cost, then maybe not. Maybe all that matters is winning, right?
Right, but his focus on winning was his big problem. That's why he ended up losing, is because he didn't really. It's sort of like, imagine playing a game of chess where you have to actually get to know every single piece on the chessboard on a personal level and figure out where they were born and who their parents were and all these other things about their personal upbringing, because all those things are important to winning. And if all you're focused on is winning, then you'll sort of miss these important details.
Right. Like you might run somebody for office who lost, but says they didn't lose. So
hypothetically speaking, of course.
Hypothetically speaking.
Okay, so
asshole.
Moving on. What's the next part?
We're on Arrakis, and some shit goes down.
There's a betrayer in the Atreides family. It's the family doctor who nobody suspects because he is supposed to be conditioned against any possibility of becoming corrupted.
Yeah, and there's a lot of development around this issue, because Paul's mother, Jessica, is a Bene Gesserit, and she has a lot of abilities to assess truth, assess motives, and through a series of kind of happenstance events, she gets misled into suspecting the assassin for the Atreides, for Hawat, that he's the traitor. And so her attention is distracted. Meanwhile, the doctor is going on with his scheme to stab the Atreides in the back.
So what do you take from that? Because the one thing that I thought of as, and we're taking this, it's a science fiction book, and I think that we should take lessons from, but also I don't know if we should get too, that every single line means something. But I do think this is important in that it's sort of like he's saying, don't accept the givens, don't accept the things that are given, because that's like your weakest point is where you think your strongest point is going to be. And there was probably, a famous son named author who wrote a whole book about things like that in warfare. And that the one other thing on top of that is sort of there is an undercurrent among all the houses of, I guess you'd call it misogyny against the Bene Gesserit, because the Bene Gesserits are basically all women. And everybody immediately assumes that Jessica is the one that was the betrayer. And there's almost not even a thought that it could be anybody else. It's an immediate assumption.
Well, and Thufir Hawat is what they call a mentat.
Mentat. I forgot about that word. Yeah, the people that are supposed to be the smartest, human computer,
the replacement for computers.
Right.
So he thinks he is behaving logically. What the Atreides never understand, and they even point this out later, is that the big weakness of the Atreides is they think they understand that the reason somebody would do something is loyalty or something like that. But the doctor, Jessica reads the doctor and how much he hates the Harkonnens, and she dismisses him too, because she thinks anybody that hates somebody that much wouldn't help them out, wouldn't betray them. But his betrayal isn't because of that. He betrays for a shot at killing the Baron.
Right.
His hatred is the reason he betrays. His hatred is the thing they didn't understand.
It's like kind of looking out for your blind corners, looking out for the places where where you would never look.
Right.
So the Atreides are betrayed, and what happens to Paul and Jessica?
The doctor who betrayed them kind of betrays Baron Harkonnen. He seems to have a
double
deal,
betrayal.
double betrayal.
That's like a triple word score.
He's got a deal with the Baron to deliver the Duke, and he underhandedly helps Paul and Lady Jessica escape.
Yeah, and he writes him a note and sends him the ducal signet, which always seemed like a funny word. But
Yeah, Dougal's not. It sounds like when I take my dog out.
Yeah.
Taking him out for a Dougal signet.
But his attempt to kill the Harkonnen is by placing a fake tooth with poisoned gas in Leo Atreides' mouth, and constantly just says right before he passes out, "Remember the tooth, remember the tooth." And he attempts it, and he ends up killing Harkonnen's mentat, Pater, and some of his guard, but the Baron had some of his shield up, and it filtered it out and gave him a chance to escape. So the assassination attempt failed, and the doctor's betrayal was all for nothing, really.
So then Paul and Jessica flee into the desert after they're left this what do they call him? It's not jump ship. It's the little
The Thopter.
Thopter. That's right.
And this is all helped along by Duncan Idaho, who comes back in further books, but he's the one that helps them escape physically.
So
Anyway,
Do you know
No,
how
you
the
go ahead.
Thopter works? That was never clear to me. Does it flap its wings?
I don't know.
yeah,
It
I don't know.
flies. It flies.
somehow.
That's all it flies.
All right.
It flies.
So they escape into the desert. They have to avoid the sandworms, and they run into a group of Fremen in the deep desert.
One of the things that occurs to me that we should bring up real quick is the spice melange itself, because it's complicated. It's made by the worms, what they call the makers. It is addictive, but its only side effect is if you stop taking it, you die. And the more
Seems like a pretty big side effect.
Yeah.
Like coffee.
The more you take of it, your eyes become 2 shades of blue. And if you have any talent for prescience, for seeing in the future, it enhances it. This is entirely what the guild does. Their navigators all see slightly into the future. And this is an ability that Paul already has. And the longer he spends on Arrakis, the more into the future he starts to see. And the more jumbled the timelines that he sees become. The possibilities start opening up in front of him. And in some of them, he sees himself dying, and in some of them, he sees himself victorious. But at all the times, he is starting to glimpse this picture of a universal jihad. And this starts to become his motivating factor to try and stop it.
Well, so one thing that sort of I noticed about that is, again, looking at the Foundation books, because I was thinking a lot of the Foundation. I haven't read Foundation in years, maybe decades. But Harry Seldon is sort of the main character in the Foundation books, who is a psychohistorian. And they're sort of able to tell the future through mathematics and other, metrics. They can sort of scry the future. and I saw a lot of parallels there. Again, I don't think that Herbert is stealing from Asimov or Asimov from Herbert. I think they're just sort of people that are thinking along the same lines. Because a lot of these guys that were making these books, whether it's Asimov or Dick or Herbert or all these other people, like they all knew each other, and they all, they were all having conversations with each other. Even Vonnegut maybe a little bit earlier. And Vonnegut also sort of less traditionally sci-fi, I guess, because Vonnegut kind of does his own thing because he's the best author that's ever lived. But that being said, when they started talking about the premonitions, I thought a lot about Harry Seldon from the Foundation series.
So I think that's a good point about Harry Seldon and predicting the future. I think, as I mentioned before, I had not really thought a lot about Foundation and Dune having a lot of parallels.
Just briefly, is it possible? So in the Foundation series, there's a lot of there's a whole bunch of worlds that they go to. Is there some way? And again, I know going forward with the future Dune books, you couldn't do this, but is it possible if you took Dune on its own, it could be a tiny little microcosm of the Foundation series?
It's possible. The thing that I was actually thinking is, in the later Foundation series books, one of the main characters is artificially intelligent being. That's a character from a whole nother set of Asimov's books, like the Caves of Steel, something like that.
Oh, the robot series?
The mystery series, the murder mystery series.
Yeah, the robot series. I love that series. I think it's so different from every other sci-fi at the time. And weird.
In some ways it could happen before Dune, because the prehistory of Dune is that there was humans got too dependent on artificial intelligence, and there was a conflict between artificial intelligence and human society finally decided, you know what, it's not worth it. We're going to do without computers. We're going to dumb everything down, and we're going to make super smart people that are going to be, or we're going to have Mentats people computers instead of silicon computers. And they have space travel with the guild folding space instead of having faster than light travel, going into warp space or whatnot. So it's
one of those funny things. I hate conspiracy theories, but I love conspiracy theories about fiction, because who gives a shit? Like, if it's wrong, it doesn't matter. So you can just write your your Ender's Game meets, and I hate the guy that wrote that, but your Orson Scott Card, yeah, fuck that guy. Your Ender's Game meets Foundation meets Dune meets the robots, yeah, write that. That's great, because it's all fiction, so it doesn't matter. I love thinking along those kind of lines. It's kind of fun.
Well, and just to bring it up real quick, apparently Dune, at least the first book, has become a big fan of fascists.
Yay!
And none of us are fascists. None of us would like it for that reason. None of us
maybe
hang out with fascists or see fascists do
I'm
anything.
Fascisty, on the weekends when
apparently it's all the
let my hair down.
The eugenics and the fighting and become the master race through, breeding of the right stock and the right genes and all that. And that is a little gross, but
yeah, apparently Frank Herbert wrote the native people living in the desert to be, all from Norway.
Well, they do have blue eyes.
That's very true.
It doesn't get bluer than that.
Very true.
And I'm sure there's a little sense of lost cause too, right? The Atreides suffer the ultimate defeat, but they still come back and are victorious in the end. I'm sure that's very appealing.
Who doesn't love an underdog?
Right. Well, especially fascists.
All right. So Paul is out in the desert, and he is has sort of talked to the Fremen and has become a Fremen.
Well, there's another part there too, because they run into a guy named Stillgar, who is the leader of the is it all the Fremen or just the what they call it?
No, he's
Stitch
just. I think he's just the
Tabor?
leader of that tribe, or that. I don't know if they call them tribes exactly. That local group.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's I don't really remember that very well. They made it sound kind of like the planetologist was the leader of the Fremen, which doesn't
That's what
never
I
really
thought
make
too.
very much sense to me because he's not originally Fremen. Why do they? It just
Well,
didn't make sense that they put him in charge.
It's the dream of the water on Arrakis. Arrakis. He's the one
Okay.
that gave him that idea.
Well, and also remember they put Paul in charge too. So them putting a non-Fremen in charge is not unheard of.
Well,
That's
right,
true.
which gets into possible white savior problems too. But
Well, a little bit.
then, but there's another thing that has to be brought up too, though, because when they get in, they find out. Jessica finds out that they have a Reverend Mother who is aging and close to death, and Jessica is also pregnant with the late Leo Atreides' actual kid, but also the daughter that she was supposed to bring him originally.
Right.
The ones the Bene Gesserit wanted
Yes.
her to bear originally.
Correct.
And when she drinks the water of life, which is a thing you get by drowning a maker, and it is poisonous, and she turns the poison into not poison. It's a whole thing. Anyway, she meets up with the spark of life that is the dying Reverend Mother, but also the spark of her unborn, pre-conscious daughter in the womb. And the Reverend Mother is right on the verge of dying, and she suddenly senses this other life form there. And she's like, "Oh, you should have told us we were pregnant. We've never done anything like this before. This might just send her into madness, but I have to do it. I'm dying." So she gives her all the previous Reverend Mother's memories.
And so they
flooded
both
into
get
her
that.
brain. It's just the daughter as
They
well.
both,
Yeah.
but they both
Yep.
get that, right? Jessica and the daughter.
Yep.
Right. So that ends up becoming Paul's sister, and if possible, even more feared by Bene Gesserit's, the Reverend Mother, Gaius, Helen Mahayim, and everybody else. They call her an abomination. But
Right. And that's something that's really developed in later books. Part of the problem, as you can imagine, for a young person, that's a lot of stuff to take in, and it never works out. Right? It's too much, and it turns out that without an adult mind and a lot of self-control, some of the entities from the past try and assert themselves.
That sort of reminds me of Star Trek Deep Space Nine with the what's Dax?
Trill.
The Trill with Trill, where sometimes the older personalities can try and take control. Well, anyway, so we've gotten Paul and Jessica flee out of the desert, and Paul, hooks up with the Freeman out there, and hilarity ensues.
So I actually have a question about this. What we're talking about with Jessica. Do you get the impression that she knew the risks that she was taking, but she was willing to take it because they had to make a deal with the Fremen, and this was part of joining the Fremen? Or was she completely oblivious to this being a bad idea?
I don't think she knew the risks to her daughter, because that had never been done before. At least that part, I think she was as surprised as anyone else.
Okay.
I think she knew that the path they were on was dangerous, but it was also kind of her only choice. Because she kind of hints that Paul could be. There's hints throughout the book that her and Paul are going to be enemies. That they're sort of working towards a common goal on Arrakis, but in the greater scheme of things, that Paul is not necessarily going to be the hero of this story.
Well, she believes he's the Kwisatz Haderach, and he even says at some point, right around the middle of the book, that he knew his mom was going to be kind of his enemy, because he's wanting to prevent the jihad, and she's unwillingly or unwittingly maybe pushing him toward it.
Well, and then to be honest, in answer to your question, Jim, I never really understood entirely that. I didn't understand, because I understand the Jessica and Paul, there's some level of distrust or enmity or something going on there. Like they're not 100% on the same page. I think that they're in a position where they both believe in what they're doing on Arrakis at this particular moment. But I don't think that I think that they understand that there is going to be static and possibly blood that comes afterwards.
Do either of you get the impression that some of that is because Jessica still is hung up on being a Bene Gesserit and wants the Bene Gesserits to have some manner of control over the Kwisatz Haderach? Because originally it's supposed to be kind of a tool for the Bene Gesserits. They didn't really envision creating a Kwisatz Haderach and letting this person loose to do whatever they wanted to.
I think that's a good question, but I don't think so. Because I think in many ways, Jessica is sort of kind of, even though she's a mother, she's sort of separated herself from the Bene Gesserits a little bit. Not like she disagrees with them on everything, but that she has sort of transcended that identity to some degree. And that she sees that what Paul is becoming is dangerous. That him sort of, I mean, they talk about sort of embracing the jihad, embracing this idea of jihad, that she's against that she wants there to be this more, and it could be what you're saying. It really could be some idea of her saying, no, we want control and we're afraid of sort of the populace getting control. You could almost see it as kind of like the prototypical establishment kind of liberal of like, we want some level of change, but we also want everything to stay under control, kind of a thing. And I'm not sure which one it is. And I'm not sure it's clear even to Herbert, at least in that book. Again, I'm not going to speak to later books. Which one?
I think she was enamored with the idea of being the one that birthed the Kwisatz Haderach, but then after she saw his power and started to dawn on her what he could actually do, that started to scare her.
Right. So I was going to say, kind of the impression I got is not that she's still on the Bene Gesserit side, but that she has some preconceived notions about whether it's a good idea for the Kwisatz Haderach to be a free agent and not answerable to anyone else. Not necessarily answerable to the Bene Gesserits, but just that maybe it's not a good idea to have them completely free to do whatever they want.
Sort of like it's a fear of the ruling class versus the mob. You know, the ruling class sees the lower class as the mob, and it's like, no, we're not keeping them down. We're just preventing mob rule.
I was thinking more of Lex Luthor's fear of Superman.
Well, not to keep bringing parallels from other books, but Robert Jordan again. In the Wheel of Time series, there's a group of women called the Aes Sedai, and they can touch the one power, and they kind of manipulate the kingdoms behind the throne and all that. And once the Dragon Reborn in Randall Thor gets born, they try to control him. And in fact, some of the Aes Sedai end up kidnapping him and torturing him on this long ride back to the White Tower, where they plan on making him a puppet. Even though he has to stay alive to be at the last battle, they want him to do the things that they want him to do.
Well, let's take a jaunt here. So Paul is sort of hooked up with the Fremen, and the Fremen don't like the Harkonnen at all, and Paul, not surprisingly, also doesn't like the Harkonnen. And there's a bit of a punch up. There's some punches thrown. So what do we think about that?
So I wanted to actually get back to Melange, and the motivations behind a lot of this is money, right? Melange, you were talking
Jim,
about
you're wrong. Capitalism is great. You should be
Right?
quiet.
Viva la capitalism. Do I remember correctly that part of the reason that it's so valuable is that it extends life?
Yes.
I remember it like helps everyone. Like
the
even if you're not the
geriatric
Kwisatz
spice
Haderach,
melange.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's the most valuable substance in the universe. It's only on this planet. And so that's why the Harkonnens want it.
Boy, everybody wants it,
The
basically.
Spacing Guild wants it because it helps them. They can't fold space without it. And
How can they not? Is just to pause there, because I'm curious about this. So why does this? I mean, the spacers are basically, and by the way, spacers is a term that's used in the Robot Trilogy too, which I did not escape my attention. The spacers want the spice too, but the spacers are making so much money off of the families. Like, you get this impression that so the Baron has sent this troop of Harkonnens and the Emperor's troops all to what is my brain failing? Arrakis. And the Baron talks about like this, like sending those troops cost just an unbelievable sum of money.
Right.
So the Spacing Guild is clearly absolutely drowning in money. Like, they are making so much money off these families that it's not, it's unreal.
Well, I mean, it's the only game in town to get from planet to planet.
Yeah. Yeah, they're the only way to travel in space.
They're the
Right,
only-
and I got that, but why? And also, you sort of talk about this. The Spacing Guild is using the spice as well. How are they using it? Is it just them putting the spice in their navigator so they're better at precognition, or what is?
Well,
it?
there's no computers. They need them to be able to see in the future to travel at near light speeds.
Well,
they
I'm
don't
curious
hit
about
things.
that. So I know that the families don't have computers. Do the Space Guilds not have computers too? I didn't know they did. They say
So
that
my
specifically?
understanding is that there's no artificial intelligence. They might have some computers, but they're pretty dumb. And I also have the impression that there's a lot of different guilds or organizations. The Bene Gesserit, the Spacing Guild, the
Landsrat.
Mentats, and they all use the spice. The impression I get is the Spacing Guild is especially dependent on the spice, that the navigators have to live for a very long time and they have to be subject to a lot of spice to be able to develop the skills to fold space.
Okay.
And that they have somewhere well below Kwisatz Haderach type skills, but like you were saying, they can see somewhat into the future.
Like, they have limited precognition.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Fair enough.
And the Freemen are also bribing them with spice to not fly any of their ships or satellites over the southern regions where they are busy terraforming Dune.
Right. So there's a lot of the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. The Fremen are selling spice on the side and keeping the Emperor and the Harkonnens dumb about how strong they are, what their plans are. And the Spacing Guild is perfectly happy to do it because they're getting a good deal on spice from the Fremen.
Could we
And then
talk about?
start to-
Could we
Sure.
talk about Kynes End just for a moment? Because that one really took me by surprise. There's sort of this thing that's sort of common in fiction of putting somebody in this dire situation so they can be rescued, valiantly or whatever. And when Kynes was in his situation, I'm not sort of easily fooled by stuff like this. I really thought he was going to get saved. I thought that Paul would, sort of come in out of nowhere and save him and whatever. And they sort of, it's a weird sort of literature trick to use his death to sort of just describe things. And I don't know if I've seen a book where it took a main character and I think he's definitely a main character, to kill him off just to sort of give you some exposition and tell you, this is this and that's that kind of a thing. I was kind of surprised by that.
Well, and I think it martyrs him too.
Yeah.
I think he was martyred before he died. He was martyred by the Harkonnen, but his actual death, when he's out there alone in the sand, that's not martyrdom, because he had already been martyred by being thrown out there. It's like his martyrdom happened, and then we get his sort of revelation, his kind of his information,
Talking to his
whatever you
dad
call it.
and all that.
So I think part of it too is a good vehicle for illustrating how unforgiving and harsh the planet is, and that even the characters that made it, that could have happened to them. Like that could have happened to Paul. That could have happened to Jessica.
In other words, just knowing the sand isn't some kind of a doesn't mean you're going to make it.
Right.
It's like you need the suits and you need all the equipment and everything.
One
Like
of the
friend-
things also that the story does really well is describing Dune. And I mean, the way I picture it, it's beautiful. It's the desert and the worms and the dryness and the still suits and all that. I mean, it's harsh and unforgiving, and I would be dead in a few seconds. But
you especially, you are like
it's-
whiter than white.
well, and I have zero survival skills, and I intend to keep it that way. But it's beautiful on its own, as kind of this stark desert planet. I think a lot of the fan-made artwork, just Google it. It's amazing, especially with the worms in the background.
So we've gone a ways. I kind of want to get towards the end of the book so we can get some of our final thoughts. So Paul fights the Harkonnen.
Well, so between the two factions is his old army buddy, trainer guy who worked for his dad, Gurney Halleck.
Yeah.
I was going to say,
is-
if you ask me, I could not think of that name in 2,500 years.
Well, he's out.
The guy with the
further-
guitar that's not a guitar.
Right.
Yeah,
Or is
Balasek.
it a sitar that's not a sitar?
You're not a sitar.
Well, and he's out with some spice collectors further south than ever, and Paul and his band discover them after he becomes a worm rider, and then they kill off the people in the Thopter, thinking they're going to ambush these Harkonnen agents, and that's when he finds out it's Gurney Halleck, and they have this whole showdown there, and Gurney realizes he and his mom is still alive. Gurney decides he wants to kill Jessica because he still thinks she's the one that betrayed the family to the Harkonnens and the Emperor. They work that out. So there's this whole kind of catalyst that takes us from Paul just becoming more Fremen to engaging with the Harkonnens and the Emperor, because eventually the Harkonnens and the Emperor himself come to Arrakis.
So I think it's also important, his appearance in the story, to give Paul a touchstone, a moral compass to bring him back towards Duke Leto, and not quite completely Fremen and ruthless and doing whatever is necessary because nature's harsh and the Harkonnens are harsh.
Well, the one thing there that I would quibble with a little bit. So I feel like Paul has multiple moral compassi. Sure, one of those. Where so he's sort of got the Fremen guy whose name now escapes me.
Stillgar?
Huh?
Stillgar.
Stillgar. He's got his father, the Duke. He's got sort of on the negative end of things, the Baron, and so he's sort of interacting in a multiple, in sort of like I don't know what the right word is, like a multipolar world, where it's not like there is one good influence and one bad influence. Because Jessica's obviously very nervous about him being too influenced by the Fremen, but she's also nothing close to, I mean, she was close to Duke Leto, but she's not close to Duke Leto sort of ideologically.
Well, and that kind of gets to his predictions for the future too. It's same sort of deal. There's a lot of points in the book where it seems like there's not a great future.
Yeah,
Like,
no matter what he does.
It reminds me of the adage, every story is a happy story if you end it at the right point, and if you don't, they all become tragedies, right? So how far into the future do you need to? At what point does it become a success? Because there's all ups and downs.
Makes me think of that Full Moon movie where all paths lead to doom.
Arcade. I love Full Moon.
Anyway, so yeah, they end up timing it with there's a massive storm coming.
They say like one of the biggest storms that's ever been through.
And the Emperor and the Baron and 5 legions of the Sardaukar are on the ground. Thufir Hawat has finally gotten through to the Baron that there isn't just a handful of Fremen left. He has told him to look at the manifests of the Sardaukar that went to try and wipe him out and those that came back. And by his Mentat calculations, there must be anywhere from 8 to 10 million Freemen. And
I thought that was really interesting how throughout the book they underestimate the number of Fremen out there.
Entirely.
I think the Baron. What's the Baron's estimate? The Baron's estimate's I think like
a handful is what
like
he keeps saying.
50,000 on the whole planet or something like that.
It's something really, really low. And they start to realize that this is a force because what is it, like 3 brigades or something like that of the Sardaukar go out to the southern area where they have discovered them, and old men, women, and children wipe out most of them. They barely escape with their lives with 3 hostages, I think is what they said.
Well,
so
and you get the impression from what she says is that Paul's younger sister basically is captured because she wants to be captured.
Yeah, she says that. Yeah, she says she let him. So they use the giant storm to break through this shield barricade, and Paul and his Freemen make it in there.
And everybody lives happily ever after.
And that's where he ends up challenging Fade Rotha. I think, does Beast Rabbani even make an appearance again, or is he just killed at some point?
I believe. Well, I don't know. I'm remembering the scene from the movie. In the movie, the Emperor presents his head to the Baron, but I don't remember.
By the way, I should say I have not seen either of the movies, so I am kind of in a unique position.
I have not seen the TV show.
We have talked offline, and Jim has impressions of the David Lynch film.
Yeah.
I've been led to believe they are not entirely positive.
There are parts of the David Lynch film that you're going to talk about this later, though, right?
We are to be continued on.
So I will just say, in general, there are parts of it that I think David Lynch did a fantastic job with, and there are other parts that are just head scratchers.
From everything
I am a person who loves David Lynch with a burning passion, and he can do no wrong. So clearly, even though I have not seen the movie, it is perfect in every conceivable way.
I've heard a lot of good things about the new one coming up, and that a lot of people really love it. So.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to do 2 things. So we get to the end, and Paul wins. Am I going to spoil anybody there? I mean, if you're to this point and you're going to be spoiled by the fact that Paul wins, then I'm sorry. I'm sorry I spoiled that for you. But
he forces the Emperor to give his daughter, the Princess Irulan, who has been opening each one of the chapters with quotes from a book she wrote about Muad'Dib, Muad'Dib. So we already know that she knows a lot about him throughout the whole book, but he convinces the Emperor to let him marry her. And he tells his concubine, Cheney, the mother of his child who got killed during the conflict, that she will never have any of his affection. She will never have any of his kids. She will never have anything except the name. And this is done entirely for power.
The Irulan won't, not the Cheney won't.
Right, the Irulan, yeah. Which is a pretty harsh way to end it. I don't know.
Yeah, because Irulan didn't do anything wrong.
Right. They've just decided that because she's the Emperor's daughter. I mean, the cycle continues.
On the other hand, you sort of get it because I mean the Emperor's been a bit of a dick up to this point, and you can understand how it's sort of one of those things where you sort of realize the how an action which appears to be irrational in one circumstance could appear totally rational in another circumstance. So, for example, if the emperor has been trying to kill you, killed your father, killed everybody you ever knew, that if you're in a position to tell his daughter to go fuck herself, even if that's not rational, the things leading up to that are pretty rational.
Yeah.
So I will say, I also think it's interesting parallel with Jessica, because Jessica never married Duke Leto, and part of that was so that Duke Leto was free to potentially make a marriage if it was politically expedient. And Paul's doing the same thing to Chani. And so in some senses, like, Chani's kind of getting the shaft too, because I mean,
In more ways than one.
wow.
Sorry, I couldn't help it.
Look at her from her perspective. She's hanging out with the Kwisatz Haderach, and he's like, well, you know, I can predict the future and do whatever I want, but it's probably pretty easy for me to marry the emperor's daughter, and you just get to be the concubine.
Well, and there's quite a not a parallel juxtaposition there too, because his dad never married Jessica, though he would have. She didn't allow it. And he constantly used the possibility that he would marry one of the other Landsrat houses as a means to keep power. He used that possibility as a tool for power. But then Paul immediately gives away that one little power to gain this much bigger power. He doesn't use that power. He immediately cashes that chip in.
All right, I just wanted to so we're going to close out and we're going to do three last things. The first one, I want everybody just sort of give you your final thoughts on the book. And I'll start off with me. So I really enjoyed this book. Again, some of the sci-fi elements, which I enjoyed, I didn't super jump on board for, but the communication stuff for me, it got me. I really enjoyed how much care Herbert paid towards how people communicated with other people, and how much care he talked about people communicating outside their culture, and how sensitive they were to how their ideas might be received by people that didn't think like them. And I think that even by the standards of today, that's pretty forward thinking and pretty interesting way to write. I thought the characters were interesting. I just thought it was a good book. So I gave it a plus. I know we haven't done this as a traditional like review of like 5 stars out of 7 stars or whatever the fuck. But I give it plus stars. More stars than I take away, I give it. Brandon, what did you think? What's your takeaways?
This is one of those books that has only grown on me and become better the more times I've read it. I said this last time was my 4th time finishing it. And the first time I didn't understand much of it. I was too young. Second time my understanding was better, but the 3rd time I really enjoyed it. I think this was last year was my 3rd time. I really enjoyed it. I could visualize it more. I knew more about what they were talking about. A lot of the subtle political maneuvers made more sense to me. This time around, I still picked up on stuff that I never noticed before. But there is also as I become more politically left pretty much each year, there is more stuff I recognized as what I would call problematic. The queer coding of the only pedophile, the fat shaming, the cultural appropriation for Islamic culture, the white savior complex. There's problems. I think that's probably more an indication of it being 1965 when it was published than anything else. And despite it becoming a favorite of fascists, I am not struck by Herbert being one. I from everything I can find out about the guy, he seemed like he would be at the very least center and probably left center. So I really enjoyed it. There is some very good videos on those subjects that I will send to Mike, and we'll link in the down there part if you want to find out more about those other things that we're not really qualified. I mean, I'm probably qualified to talk about the fat part, but everything else is not me.
I find myself very qualified to talk about the fat part. No,
I mean, I'm not.
I agree with pretty much everything you're saying. I do think that when we talk about books from that era, it is important to talk about their context. That's not to be forgiving, but you know, think about what they're saying. If you get a good message out of it, that's the important thing. And since nobody else has anything to say, I'm just kidding.
I'm ready to talk. What? So
since Jim is our guest, he gets the final word. So Jim, what are your final takeaways? By the way, not final word. We're going to do two other things, but
okay, great.
What is your final word on the book?
So tacking on to the
and thank you.
You are welcome. I don't need an excuse to drink on Monday night.
You are not
tacking
alone.
onto the fascist thread. I wasn't aware of it. It doesn't strike me as shocking. But I think probably the fascists didn't read the rest of the series, because a lot of the rest of the series is about the struggle of giving up power. The first book does not really deal with that a lot, but it does deal with Paul struggling a lot with his abilities and what it means to make the right choice. It's a lot of places in the book. It seems like there really aren't any good choices. He's trying to make the least bad choice. I'm going to touch on something else I said earlier. One of the reasons that for me this book is a reread and it really stands the test of time is the concept is so different, so forward thinking, that we would get to a point where artificial intelligence is a bad deal and we need to find a whole different way of constructing a society. And that to me is just fascinating thought experiment. And obviously Herbert's put a lot of thought into how that could work. If you were going to have a galactic civilization without artificial intelligence, that's kind of crazy.
I think Commander Data would have something to say about that.
Probably. And I will just say, for me personally, I reread very few books. Like I reread some Tolkien, not all of it. There's a few Stephen King books that I've reread a few times. There's another series that I might mention later on if we're doing some book recommendations at the end that I reread. And that's pretty much it. Otherwise, I kind of have a philosophy like I should read something new. So
I mean, there are some very specific
issues.
There are some very specific issues of Playboy that I've reread, several hundred times, but that's sort of beside the point. I want to do two last things. The thing I want to finish off with is having Jim talk to us a little bit about the series going forward. It's not going to be any spoilery, but just kind of foreshadowing a little bit. But the first thing I want to do with it, I thought would be kind of interesting, is in the new movie, we have the cast. The movie's coming out very soon, so I am going to mention the main cast members, and I want Brandon and Jim to give us a yay or nay.
What if I don't know who they are?
Well, then I will make fun of you relentlessly for the rest of your life, which, spoiler alert, I'm probably going to do anyway. So
does it, on a completely separate note for one moment, there's nothing about the book that makes me think of magic systems or anything. It seems like a very realistic book.
But it is a little fantasy.
Well, and that's what occurs to me. It's the melange. The spice is the magic system.
I heard the spice was the life. Okay.
But it is the magic system for the book. If Brandon Sanderson has you swallowing metals, this is it. This is the
Yeah,
metal
I completely agree. It's it's a fantasy book masquerading as a science fiction book.
Yeah.
Which I just love.
So I'm just going to go through a few and you tell me what you
All right.
think. Now you can say a sentence or two, but it has to be kind of a yay or nay thing.
Okay.
So for Paul Atreides, Timothy Chalamet.
Okay, I legit don't know who that is, but I have seen his picture and I think he looks good as Paul.
So I've seen some of his films. I think that he's a pretty good actor, and I'm pretty hopeful that he's going to do a great job portraying Paul.
Okay, as Lady Jessica, we have Rebecca Ferguson.
I don't know who that is.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, she's been in some. We're probably bad guys. She was in a few of the Mission Impossible movies or upcoming Mission Impossible movies.
Maybe it's best to have an unknown play Jessica.
Yeah, it could be. She looks good. She looks like that. So as Cheney or Shawnee or whatever, we have Zendaya.
I'm somewhat indifferent. I feel like the only thing that I've seen her in is the Spider-Man movie, which was a kind of different character than Chani, but she seems like a good actress. I'm hopeful.
Brennan?
I don't know who that is.
I think she's good. I think she looks really good. I think she's going to be good in that part. For Leto Atreides, we have Oscar Isaac.
If he's like in Star Wars, thumbs down, but I'm hopeful that it's not.
I don't think he's going to be that character. I think he's going to be the more subdued Oscar Isaac.
Yes.
Brandon?
No, still nothing.
Okay. Duncan, Idaho is Mr. Iowa himself, Jason Momoa.
I think that's a kind of inspired choice, honestly. I think it's a little bit out of the box for the character as it's written, but can kind of see it.
Yeah,
especially with him mixing with the Fremen.
I think that's a decent choice. Dave Bautista as
Well, hold on. He's the first one I knew.
Right.
God, Brennan, you just want to hog the microphone, don't you?
I don't know if that's the right choice. I pictured Duncan, Idaho as like a young Harrison Ford.
You know, honestly, the first person I pictured as Duncan, Idaho was the I'll have to look it up, but the security officer from Star Trek Enterprise, which means nothing to anybody but me. But I don't know why, but I pictured it very, very clearry.
So I don't know. I picture him as kind of a blonde, younger guy, like if River Phoenix made it to his early 30s or something. I mean, that's more who I pictured. Like Momoa has, and it's entirely Game of Thrones, I suppose, but he's got that barbarian quality that it doesn't stick with me, I guess.
It doesn't seem Atreides-ish, but
yeah.
The thing that occurred to me is his big part in the movie is being the kind of the ambassador between the Atreides and the Fremen, and I can see him in that capacity, that he's the person that the Atreides send out as the first person to enter the unknown.
What about Chris Evans?
Maybe. I don't know. The thing is, like, we think of the Atreides, like the Atreides, they would have a big, strong guy as like their big, strong guy. Like, that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm open to having my mind changed on him.
Okay, so
I think you might have made a better Gurney Halleck, honestly.
So Glassau Beast Raban is Dave Bautista. I think we've all seen him.
I think great.
Yeah, that works.
It's funny because in the book, I don't feel like he really has much of a part. Like in the book, he's just kind of he's there, but he doesn't do a lot.
I want to say he's set up to be a schmuck.
Before you read out who plays Gurney Halleck, I personally would think Stephen Lynch.
I think this is so interesting. Okay. So Gurney Halleck is going to be played by Josh Brolin, who I think is actually a pretty good choice. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think
You
so.
do.
I mean, he's no Patrick Stewart, but he's pretty good.
Now, Peter DeVries is going to be David Dasmalchian, who is sort of known for Ant-Man and the latest Suicide Squad movie, who I think is actually quite good. I think that could be a good casting.
What did he play in Suicide Squad?
He played Polka Dot Man.
Okay. I like.
I, by the way, did not like that movie, but it's fine.
I just don't see it.
Well, we'll see. I just want to do.
What about you, Brandon?
I don't think I know that one either.
All right.
If you haven't watched Suicide Squad, he was also one of the sort of henchmen in one of the main guy's henchmen in Ant-Man.
I remember Ant-Man, not anything else about it really. I mean,
Yeah,
I remember
Neither does
Paul
anybody
Rudd.
else.
How about? I mean, I know we're doing not intentionally doing a Marvel thing, but how about Paul Bettany as Duncan Idaho?
Yeah, sure.
I
Except,
mean, that's I guess kind of what I picture is that kind of blonde, tall, kind of athletic, less built, but
okay. I want to do just 3 more.
All right.
So as Gaius Hellas Mohaim is Charlotte Rampling, who was the psychiatrist in the 5th season of Dexter. I feel bad sort of toning her down to just that because she's been in a million things, but that's what I remember her from.
I don't remember her.
yeah, I mean,
I never watched Dexter.
Dexter's can be good. I don't know if there's any reason to watch past season 4 or so, but
I watched Dexter's Laboratory.
it's very similar. Very similar. A little more blood, but very similar. So the second to last is going to be as the Baron, Stellan Skarsgård.
So I was really not a big fan of this. And then I feel like either I saw a picture of him or he's in one of the previews and like, okay, I can kind of see it now.
I think that seems
So-
like a good choice. I think he could play that part very well.
he's always a fantastic actor. I'd like to see it. I have trouble picturing him fat, I guess, but I mean that's going to be all cosmetics anyway. So
And the last is Stillgar, and I think I'm kind of surprised he even did this. Javier Bardem as Stillgar.
oh, that'd be
I think he could do really, really good. I think
Yeah,
that's
Yeah, I think that's
honestly
probably-
looking forward. I think that could potentially be the best casting.
I
the
would
movie.
agree with you. That was just what I was going to say. That of the castings, that's the one that I feel like is most spot on.
well, and I mean, it's probably residual, but he is still a pretty menacing figure when he wants to be. I think it's a good choice.
I mean, he's basically European not Harry Dean Stanton. Why can't the guy that played in Walking Dead? My brain doesn't work anymore. Anyway, so just to close out, I was going to ask Jim to just give us kind of a foreshadowing. Again, no direct spoilers or anything like that, but just kind of tell us going forward, is there a reason to read the subsequent books? And if so, what will we see?
Okay, can I do that and give a book plug?
No, you can't. That's
All right.
absolutely
Okay.
banned forever.
Absolutely, I'm going to do that then.
Cut his mic.
So I think I mentioned earlier when I was talking about the fascist that it's been a long time since I read the rest of the series, like seriously a long time. But my overall impression of the rest of the series is some of it deals with the Bene Gesserits and their future plans, but most of it deals with Paul and Paul's progeny dealing with their powers and trying to divorce themselves from it or allow the rest of the universe to move on without them. And so in that respect, I think the rest of the series is interesting. However, from a purely entertainment value, I found the rest of the series to steadily decrease in entertainment value and rereadability. I've reread Dune probably 5 times, I would guess, maybe listened to it on tape once. And I never have ever had the desire to read any of the rest of the books.
First question, what's a tape?
What's a tape? Right. So good. As an aside, I bought a beater car from one of my neighbors and I'm driving it around. I love it. It's a 2002 Volkswagen Passat. And one of my kids who just went off to college got in and stuck his finger in the door of the tape cassette. And he's like, what is this? Why is there a door in the dash of your car? Wow.
It's how you get to the engine. That's
Right,
where the engine
exactly.
lives, just behind
Go
it.
right in there. So a book plug. If you don't want to read the rest of this series and you still want to read something by Herbert, another 2-book series that he wrote that has to do with some of the themes in Dune of harsh environments and people adapting to harsh environments and creating some kind of dangerous people is the Dasari Experiment. And I believe the second book is called Whipping Star. It's been a long time since I read them, but I thought they were pretty interesting and worth a read. Another series that I feel has a lot in common with Dune, but is very much a fantasy series, is the Prince of Nothing series, which almost no one has read, and I love. And it's, like I said, it's completely fantasy. It's very dark, but a lot of the things that I like about Dune are some of the things that I like about Prince of Nothing series. And as a disclaimer, like Dune, there's probably a lot of fascists that like it. Women are not particularly treated well in the book, but I don't think that's necessarily because the author has it out for women. I think he's trying to write a story that's kind of based on more medieval society. So I don't think he really has it out for women, but that's my disclaimer on that. Prince of Nothing series. Scott R. Backer is the author of that.
Fair enough. Brennan, do you have any book recommendations to close out with?
Oh man, I could do my own thing on that.
Brennan,
Honestly,
we'll attach a 1-hour video just of Brennan's book recommendations.
Honestly, as far as this goes, I would say give the Wheel of Time series a try. It's 14 books long. It's a slog. It spent my entire reading capacity for the first 6 months of this year. But it's worth it. It's pretty good, and it's coming up as a series on Amazon Prime. So if you want to see if you can knock it out before that happens, it's worth doing. It too suffers some of the misogyny problems. Oddly enough, a lot of the women in the story, I think, kind of overcome their author a lot. As much as he tries to paint them as heroic, but still needing a man sometimes, like, I don't know that any of them could pass the Bechdel test, but they honestly, I think they become better than what their author originally made them out to be. Egwene Alvear tends to be one of my all-time favorite female characters in a book series, and it is, I think, heavily influenced. I don't know that Robert Jordan ever admitted to it. I think he said there was only a couple of things from Dune that he thought was put into the book, but I don't know that, like, conscious bias, the more as we talk about it, the more I think that Dune has definitely influenced Robert Jordan and most certainly has influenced Brandon Sanderson.
And I'll close out with the one that I mentioned multiple times, which is Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. I think it's a great series. I mean, all the Isaac Asimov stuff is great. And you should read it. It's a different look at science fiction. And I also, as always, recommend every single Kurt Vonnegut book because he is the best author who has ever lived and better than anybody else. That being said, I think we're going to close out. I want everybody to like, subscribe. Brandon, do you have any closing thoughts?
I'm really looking forward to the new movie. I think I'm going to attempt to go through the Lynch film tomorrow and give the book a try. Give it a read. Even if you do it on audiobook, I think it was still pretty good. from what I understand, the things that were left out were some of the more descriptive of the planet, which is probably more what motivated the fan art, but still, I think it was basically well done. I think if you got a credit on Audible, give it a shot.
And Jim, do you have any final thoughts on Dune, the book?
One of my favorites. I think everybody should take a little time to read it. I think it's one of the pillars of early science fiction literature, and I think the David Lynch film is worth giving a shot too. I'm really looking forward to this movie. I'm a little bit disappointed it's made into 2 movies. I want to see it all at once. I wouldn't care if it was 8 hours long. I'd still sit through it.
Fair enough. The only thing I want to say about the new movie is it's Denis Villeneuve. That guy made Blade Runner 2049, which is one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen in my life. So this film is going to be pretty. If nothing else, this film is going to be incredibly pretty to see. And we look forward to seeing you there. So I want everybody to like and subscribe. And I want to thank you for watching. And I want you to have a good drink and have a good day.